So it is not expected that a person, nor is it desirable that a person blindly accept anyone as their spiritual master or as representative of God. You want to know whether or not I am actually the representative of God? There's so many people saying they're a representative of God. So you must check. You must check what I'm teaching, and you must check with the Lord in your heart. Not you should just lightly or blindly accept, just because many people are accepting. As far as you know, all these people here are insane. Huh? You don't know. Or maybe you already know that. You know?
This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people that have so much to gain and have such a material motive for putting a position on me will never let the true facts come above board to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions,
Yes.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 224. I am your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we're pulling off a hat trick this fall in terms of unexpectedly timely episodes that we might have to bump up in the queue. Because today...
What were the other ones that were unexpectedly?
Well, I guess Big Cats, liminally Big Cats, and then our sort of like pre-election episode. I guess we bumped that one up too.
Although we decided to do that. Yeah, well, I mean, that was timely. That wasn't serendipitous, that was like...
So. You're right.
And also, I guess neither is this, because it's kind of responding. Although this one is a little bit different because, as I said before, we were planning to do this for... This is one of the... maybe the third episode idea that we ever came up with.
Right.
And we never did it. Because...
We never did... I guess so many other things were going on.
It kind of just dropped out of, the consciousness, and it seemed, less and less relevant. And I guess, so... It would have been nice if we could have bumped it, if it was episode 3 or something, and we, could bump it up in the way we did with the episode about Kamala and the episode about JD Vance. It is amazing how whenever we do talk about Beltway people, they do seem to bubble up to the very forefront of politics, but.
Interesting.
Yeah, so we have had Kamala, who was the Democratic nominee, and then JD Vance is now going to be the vice president.
First Hindu American, vice president.
Yeah, I think we may be proven right about J.B. Pritzker too. We shall see. But
2028. Let's go.
But but this is someone who had a little bit of prominence, back in I think she kind of got into politics in 2012, and it's interesting because she was kind of around Bernie, everyone's favorite Bernie, in the Bernie era. In 2016, she was kind of a big booster of Bernie, and a lot of people sort of liked her because of that. It's weird. I was kind of reflecting on this, and I feel like I never really. I think it might just be because she hates Muslims so much and always has, and can't quite keep it, can't quite suppress it. Can't quite control herself about just expressing her ravenous hatred of Muslims. That that's why I never was really. I was always a little bit sussed out by Tulsi. I mean, it didn't help that
you immediately. I think I have to confess, even way back in maybe 2015 or something like that, when the United States was involved in its dirty regime change war. That's your favorite phrase.
Exactly. The regime change
in
war.
Syria, which was a dirty regime change war. And, she would come out. She was one of the only Democrats. Even Bernie wouldn't really, he'd vaguely gesture at this, but it was Representative Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat of Hawaii, that would, give certain interviews every now and then or say some spicy things like the United States intelligence community is arming al-Qaeda in Syria, which was not a serious thing to say. And, there's even a moment where I thought, wow, ooh, she's talking some real shit. But I think because of the Islam thing, which at first I was like, well, this is American politics and ISIS is a big thing at this time. And, maybe she's just saying that to like position herself to not be attacked as being like a hippie. But like, and it's a little bit, given Obama's track record, that's a little sus. But no, I think you're absolutely right to clock like as time progressed, you started to notice conspicuously that her fixation on radical Islamic terrorism was a little bit weird, given her other positions especially. And but how could we have known back in those days of 2015, 2016, that our renegade Bernie supporting alt-left, you could say, congresswoman, just 8 years later would be nominated
I remember you
be the
saying,
overseer of Donald Trump's intelligence services.
There was a little bit of like in 2016 she went and met with Steve Bannon because Steve Bannon, who was basically running their Trump White House at that time, loved her.
She went to Trump Tower. She met with Trump after he won.
Like after 2016, there was some sort of, Bannon said about her, like, she gets the foreign policy stuff, the Islamic terrorism stuff.
I love Tulsi. I love Tulsi.
Yeah,
she's great.
Exactly.
Like, and that was also a little bit of like a flag of like, he doesn't say that about Bernie. He doesn't say that about any other Democrats. But for some reason, Tulsi, he likes the cut of her jib,
Yeah.
And
yes. And once you start to, this is the thing, like it's true, like and I mean, in a way, like some of Tulsi's like stuff about Syria is like kind of a species of this general thing that I feel like was very prominent like during that time, where it's like Sunni's bad, like like sort of this like brain dead, like I feel like it's like a lot of dirtbag people kind of have this like weird, very Manichaean like idea about like politics in the sort of quote unquote Muslim world, and Tulsi like really sort of plays around with that, I think, where it's like all these like all Sunnis basically are Al Qaeda, and like only like these strong men can really like stop them.
Yeah, we can
and
ironically say like that Iran is like based or joke about that, but like the Sunnis, the Saudis are the real sickos kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And which is like like 90% of Muslims and what. Anyway, my point is that nothing against like Shia, like, and I think that you can see like how like Iran and Iran sort of proxies, for lack of a better word, or like Shia countries have been, or like Shia governments have been the ones who have really like stepped up for Palestine in a way that, and it is true, like those Gulf monarchies like absolutely suck. But anyway, I digress. My point is that like Tulsi's, it's a little bit different when we're dealing with Tulsi, because I think the reason why she has that fixation is not just like a sort of simplistic view of simplistic but well-meaning anti-imperialism or something, it is,
or even I would say just like, oh, she's a crypto neocon, like
exactly
in many ways,
or that
yes,
she's just it's much more weird than that, I guess.
Yes,
and
there are weirder, darker reasons why she is this way.
And it's something that I feel like people still like don't like quite. It hasn't like breached everybody, even people who like are generally kind of like with it and like are like privy to these things and like concerned about things like imperialism or like things like the like Epstein or whatever, like these weird networks, like in this sort of like, for lack of a better word, like parapolitical space. There's still this like weird like and maybe it's more of sort of the right-wing side of that, where she's kind of this new sort of fresh star, having sort of jumped over from the Democrats to be a Republican. But there's this weird kind of like, I don't know, like naivety about Tulsi, where she's really taken at face value. And even though like a lot of the stuff about like, you know, where she comes from and what she's all about, like is not by any means secret, and is like really, a lot of it is like made its way into like the mainstream press. Not to say that like people trust the mainstream press, but still,
That's
like,
actually
it's widely
true,
known.
yeah.
But somehow,
I think
it hasn't, like, there's still this kind of like, oh yeah, Tulsi's on the level, and like, I don't know, she saw.
Well, I think the other the other thing I think you brought up to me before that I think we have been seeing in the present discourse is now it's like very much. I mean, the last couple of years it's been undeniable, but now that she is the DNI pick for Donald Trump, like you really can't deny that she is like, you know, on the right now. But I think maybe you're also talking about instances where people are kind of like, oh, like Tulsi used to be cool, but like she's drifted.
Exactly.
She's made a right-wing turn. And I think,
which is,
you know,
a fundamental misunderstanding.
I can understand why people would have that impression of her because of like the front she puts on. But as we will get into today, because we're going to do a little deep diving, these views of her, these like problematic things about these red flags have been there for a very long time.
Yeah,
actually,
right.
since like the beginning of her political
career.
Tulsi
has evolved, like maybe in very, very small and superficial ways. But like if there's one like misconception that I feel like I want to dispel, it's the idea that Tulsi has like significantly changed, like, or has like really like her views have changed. Like, I don't think that's true at all. In fact, I wrote in the work flowy that she's, I use the term insight role, borrowed from the 09A. And that's not, like, you know, it's more of a heuristic, but still, like, it is kind of apropos. Like, that I really think is what's going on. Like, she does not always say what she really thinks and never has.
Yeah.
But, like, I think that the core of her principles is, like, very fixed, and it's very weird. It's very, like, sus, for lack of a better word.
Another term, to borrow from the Trots, you could say she's doing entryism. And in a way, not certainly in the Democratic Party, she was doing entryism. But even in Trump world, I could say that she still is, even though she definitely aligns more naturally with a lot of these people, she still is doing a certain kind of entryism or insight role, even with these people, because she's not being upfront about what really drives her. And I would say, like, the only thing that's changed about Tulsi from the early 2010s to today is she no longer pretends to be a Democrat. That's like the main, like she did pretend to be a Democrat up until maybe, I forget, 2021, 2022 when she left. It might have even been last year, where she's an independent now, but clearly aligned with like,
but she
the
didn't
right-wing
always,
ecosystem.
like, that's the thing. This is, I think we should probably get into like our history, but she was not like your typical Democrat, like, ever. Like,
right.
And she, like, you know, she had to be a Democrat because she lives in Hawaii, you know, and Hawaii is like a very like deep blue place, right? And
with,
so
I believe, one congressperson, right? There's one congressional seat in Hawaii.
If you're gonna be like representing that, you know, if you're gonna be representing Hawaii, then let me see if there is one congressional seat from Hawaii. Congressional
pretty sure
seats,
there is.
Hawaii. Yeah, you're probably right. But yeah, I guess
it's a little bit like how, you know, Mayor Eric Adams, like in New York, is in many ways kind of like conservative coded at times, but there's absolutely no way that a Republican is going to be elected mayor of New York. So what you end up having is like people that just sort of run on like the uniparty ticket, but then might, I mean, in the case of Gabbard's family, they are very much kind of doing like an entryism into the Hawaii Democratic Party. And we're, I mean, coming from a pretty opposite orientation.
How do we even begin
from where they
like,
started?
with
I know,
this?
like, where do we
it's
start?
so hard to like, okay, so maybe people know, but Tulsi grew up basically in a cult called the Science of Vanity Foundation, which, and like, it's amazing. I was looking at a Wikipedia article and it's so heavily downplayed. Like how, like the huge role this played in her life. It's like, oh, she was mostly homeschooled because the man who runs this group, Chris Butler, Tulsi's Guru Dave.
Guru Dave.
What's
his full name? Oh my god.
We're gonna
like
have practice
trouble
pronouncing
with
it, but now I can't even find it like in our document. Is Parahamsa?
Parahamsa, something. Yeah, it's Chris Butler, also known as Cy Young. That was his original cult name. probably a boomer baseball reference, but
Jagadguru Siddha Swarupanada Paramahamsa. Sorry, I'm getting it wrong, but that's basically the name that he uses. But his birth name is Chris Butler. He was a guy who was
he is a guy. He's still alive. He's still in Hawaii. He's old now, but he's still
alive.
with us.
He's like in his 70s. Right. So he was in the Hare Krishnas at first. That's like where he really like got into. But his sort of eccentric personality and his like need for control and to kind of be the center of his own thing eventually started tension between him and the leader of the Hare Krishnas.
I think it was actually more about a financial impropriety kind of scandal around the building of the Hare Krishna temple in Hawaii. He was denounced in a letter by the founder, Prabhupada, who I'll name check him properly in a second, but these guys have very long names. But yes, the founder of the Hare Krishnas, and maybe we'll cover a little bit of them as well, because there's a lot of confusion about, Tulsi presents herself today as a Hindu. That's what she calls herself, a Hindu. And while that's not entirely false, there's some pretty heavy asterisks on that, both from the perspective of just the Hare Krishna movement itself and ISKCON, the sort of organization that runs it, and also Chris Butler, who eventually is like, I wouldn't say a full schismatic, but sort of an offshoot of Hare Krishnas.
Yes.
Like
and
a
it was
second
actually
order
Chris
offshoot.
Butler's idea for her to call herself Vaishnava Hindu. I believe that's what the term that she uses.
More insight role kind of vibes. But I think this is the critical thing about Tulsi. And it is frustrating because I first found out about this. I remember the scales dropped from my eyes. I don't know if he was like literally the first person to ever deep dive on Tulsi as like a sus, like potentially MK'd like cult person.
Yeah.
But the great Dave Emery, the OG parapolitical radio host, I actually went back and listened to his episodes from 2017, early 2017, about Tulsi Gabbard being basically like a sus person raised in a Hare Krishna mind control cult. And then in subsequent years after that, though, I was actually surprised looking back over these sources that there were a number of like big mainstream like magazine feature articles about Tulsi's history with the Science of Identity Foundation cult and Chris Butler. And they all like dug up, like they did some real journalism and like tracked down people who had kind of grown up with her or grew up in the cult or escaped the cult, etc., and dug up these things. But then when she gets announced as DNI the last week, of course, the libs are not going to like it, right? Because she's aligned herself. She's left the Democrats. She's been totally down with Team Trump, et cetera, et cetera. But it frustrates the hell out of me. And we will talk about these episodes like in her career. But like the only thing they will bring up is because people talk, turn on MSNBC, the failing MSNBC or CNN, and people are going like, oh, besides, Matt Gaetz, she is by far the most unqualified. Like all these NATO guys are like going on news and being like, no, she's so bad. She's so bad. But the only two fucking reasons they will give is that she went in early 2017 on a trip to sit down and talk to gas-killing animal Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and then seemingly, I'd say probably accurate, like seemed to take a more like friendly to Syria position in that conflict versus everybody else in the government. And then she recites Russian talking points. She says the same things that Putler says about Russia. Exactly, and so obviously, given the conflict in Russia right now, that is, setting off alarm bells that, oh, she's going to, but, they won't come out and like say it, but they're all like implying vaguely, like they did a few, back when Trump won the first time, that like she's some kind of like FSB asset or something. Like she just must be, because like why else would you say things that Putler agrees with?
The
like,
Russian asset angle. Like, and, I'm sure that like she may be considered like an asset by Russia. However, like that's not like the main thing that's going on here. Like that's not why she is how she is. in my view.
You know, as far as the disqualifying like I hate that it's like the closest thing she did to like a thing that I would like agree with and be like, oh, like if she wasn't so sus in every other aspect, I'd be like, well, that's like a brave and like good thing for a congressperson to go over and do and like buck our evil foreign policy establishment that wanted to like, you know, put in a no-fly zone and all this bullshit, and, you know, go and like talk with Assad and be like, I'm not afraid. Like, you know, it's like in a different universe, you could see if like Rashida Tlaib did that and was just like pretty even-handed about the whole thing, and then everyone jumped on her, you'd like, hey, fuck off. Like, you know, like what? We can't talk to, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like they're so fixated on that when, you know, there's a few interesting things to that episode of like who arranged her trip and everything.
Yeah, right.
But it's still like first of all, if you just want to tank Tulsi, why are you not going the cult angle? Because this was in the New Yorker, like New York Magazine did a huge thing on it. The Daily Beast did a bunch of things on it.
It was the New Yorker, right? Yeah, the New Yorker.
Right, yeah, the New Yorker.
Article, What Does Tulsi Gabbard Believe? Which was, in 2017, which is
pretty early.
You know, pretty early on. You know, that was kind of when she first like became, you know, I think got on people's radar. So this like should have been like a torpedo right to the Tulsi machine, but it hasn't like panned out that way. I guess because I was thinking like through this, like she really is very much like someone involved with the Moonies in a way.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
It's very
totally.
Mooney vibes.
I was reading some articles mentioned that specifically like Chris Butler has created like a political machine in Hawaii that is very reminiscent of the Moonies.
Yeah. There was a quote like that, in one of those articles from like Meanwhile in Hawaii or something, that local newspaper. Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
It is like the Moonies, and actually, you know, it's like you could tie it up to today because, you know, she never talks about this and she acts uncomfortable when anyone brings it up. And I think, was it in this article from 2017 where she kind of gives the only line about Chris Butler that she's ever given, which is like, you know, I think she's confronted with some of his virulently homophobic rants from the 1980s that were definitely a big part of his whole like kind of a theology. Right. And she was like, well, that's so weird because I'd never heard him say anything that would like that was negative or mean towards anybody. And honestly, like I'm just so lucky to have had like the blessing of the spiritual guidance of like my guru Dev, you know, and kind of like downplaying.
Like she doesn't call him that. She really does downplay. Like
she downplays.
Yeah,
it.
I've never heard him say anything hateful or say anything mean about anybody. Which, if you read like some of the accounts about Chris Butler, like in some of the tapes, the recordings of his lectures, this idea is like outrageous. I can speak to my own personal experience and, frankly, my gratitude to him for the gift of this wonderful spiritual practice that he has given me and to so many people. Yeah, so
there she is on the record not denying, but she does deny. She has denied over the years that she has any current like connection to him, except until I think it was a 2016 video, maybe for an ISKCON conference or something like that, where she drops in a line, you know, talking about Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishnas, and how amazing he is, and he lives in the light of Krishna, and et cetera, and that the bliss of hearing the word Krishna on your lips is just that, you know, not trying to make fun, but like, they love, they worship Krishna as a monotheistic godhead. For anybody who's curious, that's a big difference between traditional, I think.
Well, there are like Hinduism is kind of like a construct in a way, and this is another angle of Tulsi that I definitely want to get into, is like how much support she has and how like her career has been fueled by like her sort of alignment with like the sort of Hindu right, or like what
BJP,
one publication
Modi
calls like the American Sangh. Yeah, exactly. Like it. Yeah, like that's a huge like aspect of the whole Tulsi phenomenon. Like it wouldn't be possible if it weren't for her alignment with that movement. And again, like it is interesting because obviously, like, you know, they're reading the Bhagavad Gita and like all this stuff, like, or, you know, in the Hare Krishna translation and with the Hare Krishna interpretation, which you know, because he has kind of a an exegesis of it, and that's probably like when Tulsi gifted Modi the Bhagavad Gita that she like grew up reading, which is like so crazy. Like, you know, it's like, this is the one I brought to Iraq with me, like my Bhagavad Gita, you know, like that probably was. Wow. I would imagine like that was a copy of the Bhagavad Gita as it is, which was Prabhupada's like his sort of translation in English of
his
the Bhagavad
riff
Gita.
on it.
Yeah, which is kind of emphasizes their teaching about it, which it's very interesting. Like I don't know Sanskrit, so it was like hard for me to like figure out like who's right. But it's interesting seeing kind of the debates about like his, because one thing that struck me about Chris Butler's teaching is this idea that like the soul, like you are eternal, like you're not identical with your body, but you yourself are eternal, or only the self is really real, and the self will exist forever. And I did see some debates about the translation of the Bhagavad Gita, like whether it's talking about like individual souls or this kind of identity between the soul. Because like what I would think is like, yeah, well, ultimately there's identity between like, there's a little bit of God like in all of us, right? It's kind of the idea that like only God really exists. And in that respect, like, that is truly imperishable, like that aspect of people, maybe not in people, but, you get what I mean, like Lahir and Bat and all this stuff. But Asik Virla didn't mean to imply God being in anything, but, like,
okay.
yeah. But that's a very common idea. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, in this, it's kind of a little bit different. Like, it is monotheistic, but it doesn't really like, this is kind of a conflict between like the Upanishadic sort of reading of it and at least this interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita. But I think there's different ones.
That makes sense.
That was an interesting aspect of that to me, like this sort of immortal like selfhood. But anyway, so
yeah. Well, as I was saying, like in one of these like Hare Krishna videos, she sort of recorded herself doing like a video greeting, and she drops in pretty casually. And like, if you have no idea what Chris Butler's guru name is, you would totally miss it. But, she's talking about Prabhupada and how great he is, and then says, my guru Dev, blah, 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 like basically saying Chris Butler's guru name, like reminded us that, and says some quote.
Namaste, Jai Shri Krishna. When I was invited to join all of you on this most auspicious celebration, I was immediately overcome by feelings of both humility and great joy. I'm blessed and honored to have this opportunity, and I want to thank you from the core of my heart. Although my attempts to offer praise to my beloved grandfather, spiritual master, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, can be likened to a child offering a small torchlight to the sun, out of his kindness, Lord Krishna beckons me to do so for my own edification. Throughout my life, I, like so many of you, have been faced with stressful, challenging, or fearful situations. But in all these situations, I've had the great fortune of being able to find solace, inner peace, and spiritual happiness by taking shelter in the holy names of Krishna. Indeed, simply by uttering Jai Shri Krishna, my lips taste sweetness beyond compare, and my heart leaps for joy. But the fact is, if not for the compassion of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, I never would have achieved this supreme treasure of Krishna's holy names. Srila Rupa Goswami says, a person who is unable to bear another's distress is called compassionate. It was this compassion that drove Srila Prabhupada to attempt something so brave and so daring to deliver the message of Lord Chaitanya and the holy name to all of mankind. We get a glimpse of the compassion that Srila Prabhupada felt for all of us in a poem which he wrote in honor of his spiritual master, His Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. He wrote, "The jivas have reshackled themselves with the heavy chains of ignorance and delusion, and as they swim about in the vast ocean of material existence, in a frenzied attempt to reach the shore of peace, they perish. This lance of misery pierces my heart as it similarly afflicted you, Srila Prabhupada, who suffered so upon seeing the suffering of the misguided humanity. Out of this compassionate desire to help us cross the ocean of material suffering, Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami embarked upon a long and difficult voyage across the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. He was already advanced in age and in relatively poor health, yet his compassion drove him to commence the journey anyway. While on this journey, he suffered 2 heart attacks, all the while taking shelter in his spiritual master and Lord Krishna. Those of us who are the spiritual children and grandchildren of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, would all be lost orphans were it not for his compassion and mercy. My Gurudev, Srila Siddhaswarupananda Paramahamsa, my Gurudev, Srila Siddhaswarupananda Paramahamsa, has said that while we will never be able to repay the debt of gratitude that we all owe Srila Prabhupada, what we can do is be pleasing to him by always taking shelter in the holy names of Krishna. By taking shelter in the names of Krishna, we too may become lovers of Krishna, whose lives are motivated by compassion and love for others. My dear friends, in this way, with the sweet names of Krishna always upon our lips and in our hearts, we will always be able to transmit the transcendental nature and glories of Srila Prabhupada's journey to the United States of America and the Western world. So on this historic and auspicious day, we should take this opportunity to beg for the blessing of Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, so that we too can taste the nectar of love for Krishna and be motivated by compassion to use our lives working for the spiritual and material well-being of others. Again, I thank you all for this opportunity. Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada.
But that's like in, I think, either 2015 or 2016. So she's already in Congress at this point, and she, in a kind of insider audience to, you know, sort of fellow Hare Krishna type people, she's still shouting out Chris Butler as her guru,
Yes.
even
In
though
fact,
she's
I
denying it not long after to like the New Yorker and everybody else.
Yeah, I was wondering about that video, if like she, like Chris Butler was like, even though she seems to be kind of under a mandate to like distance herself from him like a little bit, you know, without actually kind of like throwing him under the bus or insulting him in any way. Like, I wonder if like in that, like, you know, this is like what's really personal to him, you know, like being acknowledged as like Tulsi. Like there was an interesting quote that I wanted to highlight from that New Yorker article about like an interview they did with Butler. And, you know, he compared himself to a cello teacher, right? Yeah. Like Butler regards Gabbard with fatherly pride, likening himself to a music teacher watching a star pupil excel. He's taught one of his students cello, he says, and he sees that, oh, this student of mine is now playing cello in the Philharmonic Orchestra, and it's beautiful. That quote of his like really stuck out to me, because he's kind of like suggesting that what Tulsi is doing now in politics is the same thing that he's been doing, or is part of the same project that he's been pursuing his whole life, you know, and
to be a conductor of people.
Yeah. Or I mean, and like the sort of incentive, I think we should go into this, but the incentive for her and for her parents to get into politics really came from like Chris Butler, but
100%,
you know, he definitely like wanted that to happen. Right. But yeah, but I think that the reason why like she was acknowledging him at ISKCON, you know, at this sort of Hare Krishna conference, is because like, you know, he like still maybe has that, or my thought of it is that he still kind of has that you know, grievance with Bhaktivedanta or Prabhupada, that like, you know, they kind of had that falling out, and he was forced to like submit to him and give up his own followers.
He was. But then Prabhupada died a couple years after that. And so he has this kind of like love-hate thing where like he has to sort of genuflect towards him officially, but like you could tell his ego is kind of like raging to like, he wants to be Prabhupada. Like he wants that position for himself naturally. Was Mark Wayne Mullen nominated for anything by Trump recently?
I don't know.
I feel like I saw that name popping up around. He is a senator from Oklahoma. I just noticed that he was in a bipartisan like exercise group with Tulsi, a famously tough bipartisan workout group led by Mark Wayne Mullen. Tulsi was involved in that. Yeah. But anyways, yeah, I mean, the whole political thing, That's the thing with like Tulsi also, is that she's not just in a cult. She was effectively born into a cult. She's like a second generation Butlerite.
She went to like a science of identity. Like the only time she went to school was like a school in the Philippines, which was established by the Science of Identity Foundation like for 2 years.
Because
like Chris Butler didn't like believe in school. He hated like history, like teaching history, anything like that. So they just learned like about, you know, I guess how great Chris Butler is most of the time.
Not only that, there was a very, according to people who like went there and have spoken out about it, like a very sus prison-like school that was built in the Philippines in the 1980s. But there was also a school that was a little bit less like extreme and brutal in Hawaii that was run by Mike Hubbard, Tulsi's father, right? Like, because he was like a professional educator,
Mike
you know,
Gabbard,
he was like a teacher. Mike, what did I say?
Yeah, Hubbard, which, you know, like,
Mike Hubbard.
I understand why you might have that name on your mind.
I don't know. Yeah, Hubbard. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, there's Scientology connections in Trump's cabinet picks too. But sorry, Mike Gabbard, Tulsi's father, was like the headmaster and basically ran the Chris Butler school in Hawaii, I think through the 80s and the 90s. And I think her mother was also involved in it as well. And, you know, she eventually, I think, ended up on like the state education board. Like that was her entree into politics. The first one actually around 2000. But so her family was involved in like running Chris Butler schools. They pretty much, there's a little bit of like fuzziness around when exactly they linked up with Chris Butler, because Mike Gabbard, he's Samoan, correct?
It's interesting because like, he's half Samoan. He's like half white, Samoan. Half Samoan.
Right.
So Tulsi's like a quarter Samoan. It's interesting, like, because I feel like she's also sort of like, like a POC, or people kind of think she's of South Asian heritage because she's Hindu. But no, she's not.
Yes.
She's a quarter Samoan and like 3/4 white, I guess.
I do feel like that gets played up a lot, that she just lets people think that she's ethnically like South Asian or like Indian, you know, that she's like, you know, an ethnic Indian Hindu.
It did occur to me that she is named like like, you know, it's short for like Tulasi. It's like you know, also like kind of a flower, you know, just like Kamala, like a lotus. She's named for the holy basil plant known as Tulasi, a sweet-smelling herb that appears in the Bhagavad Gita as an offering to the Lord. So there you go. Yeah.
Wow, this is actually bizarre. I didn't realize this. So Mike Hubbard. Oh wait, sorry, no, wrong Mike Hubbard.
Yeah.
Sorry, why do I
Gabbard.
keep saying Hubbard? What the fuck am I? Yeah,
this might be like, I just want to read a little bit from this article just to give some Chris Butler background. You know, that kind of feeds into this. It might be good to, because this is like to sort of situate him within the ISKCON group and everything. This is from the Caravan article, The Americans Sang and Their Affair with Tulsi Gabbard. It's by Peter Friedrich. It's called All in the Family, The American Sang's Affair with Tulsi Gabbard. In the early 1970s, Tulsi's Guru Dev, divine teacher, became one of Prabhupada's closest disciples. Born Chris Butler, he has held many identities: Chris, Sai, Siddhaswarupanada Parahamsa, and Jagad Guru. His years in ISKCON were marred by frequent conflict. He faced near disavowal, rebuke for prioritizing his own teachings, and denunciation by fellow disciples for encouraging more allegiance to himself than to Prabhupada. In 1977, after Prabhupada's death, Butler established the SIF and began initiating his own disciples in the splinter sect. Science of Identity has always been a highly politically involved organization in Hawaii, the journalist Christine Grallo told me. So we'll read a little bit from her article. She did like a 3-part series called Butler's Web, which has some great stuff in there. So yeah, she's
Butler's Web series.
Expert, this guy, yeah.
Big shout out, everyone should read. We'll read a lot from that.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Her investigations have traced the connections between Butler, his foundation, and political candidates. Science of Identity uses tactics nearly identical to Scientology to attack and silence critics, journalists, and former members through attempted character assassination, restraining orders, psychological warfare, well, Tulsi's expertise, and even false police reports, she said. It's no wonder so many former Butler devotees do not want to be publicly named in the media. The SIF has had an extensive influence on Gabbard. Her association with the organization began with her parents and extended into her education and her entry into politics, through which she met both her first and second husbands and several members of her present congressional office staff. Butler's group was not a part of ISKCON, however. While Prabhupada required his disciples to sell books, flowers, and incense in the streets, Butler opposed those practices because they turned people off. His initiates did not shave their heads or wear robes. He encouraged them to pursue professions in fields such as law and engineering. That changed when ISKCON Swami visited Hawaii. Whether as a result of sincere conviction or pressure from the larger group, Butler surrendered himself, along with his disciples, properties, and money, to Prabhupada in 1971. His surrender was accompanied by confusion that prefaced years of strife. For so long, we've been worshiping Sai as God, one of Butler's former disciples told Prabhupada in March 1970. So what's our position towards Sai? Attempting to resolve the conflict, Prabhupada spent several weeks with Butler in Hawaii in June 1975. In a series of wide-ranging conversations preserved in audio recordings, the two discussed levitation, nuclear war, cryonics, the supposed faking of the moon landing, the war in Vietnam. It was primarily desired by the big corporations, Butler said, and an idea to turn the Bhagavad Gita into a movie. Butler expresses disdain for people with big titles such as psychologist or professor or director of national intelligence, but who deceive people into thinking they are authorities of some sort. They also discuss an issue that soon impacted Tulsi's life, education. I was writing an article on the education system and how it should be changed, Butler said. He wanted to put the Bhagavad Gita into this present school system, or alternatively, create a school system apart from it. Butler ventured into politics that year. In a tract titled, Why Politicians Are Stupid, he wrote that people were suffering from the heavy burden of crooked, inhuman, unrighteous political leaders. So he developed a plan. In 1976, his disciples launched a political party, the Independence for Godly Government, and fielded 14 candidates for office. Bill Pennarosa, the party's chairman, whose son, Kainoa, is now Tulsi's chief of staff, unsuccessfully ran for Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District. Meanwhile, Prabhupada's health was failing. His disciples grew increasingly concerned about Butler. They distribute his books instead of your books in the street, one of them told Prabhupada. Another spoke of the disease within Butler's group. Yet another claimed that Butler had deviated and created a faction. Another asserted that one of Butler's papers had published an article against the devotees. By 1977, when Butler formally founded the SIF upon Prabhupada's death, the group had developed what the Honolulu Advertiser called a loose community of businesses. These included 2 newspapers, run by Pennarosa, the other by Rick Reed, and the chain of health food stores called Down to Earth. This prospering network soon proved instrumental to financing the SIF's dreams of developing a political machine and the Gabbard's campaign. As I recall, they became involved in SIF in the early to mid-1970s, Sina told me. In the Gabbard home in American Samoa, she remembered, a centerpiece of the house would be an altar to Chris Butler, adorned with flowers and incense. She even recalled some reference to their prostrating at his feet. Mike made the connection and was the vehicle into Butler's SIF. When they moved to Hawaii to join their charismatic young guru, Tulsi's parents were immediately immersed in SIF enterprises. They founded the Panamaloa School, with Mike as headmaster, to educate the group's children. In a 1984 lecture, Butler described his views on schooling. Screw the history book, he said. The only purpose of such books was to please the school board thing, so children could pass the stupid tests you have to pass in order to make it so that people are saying you're educated. Instead, children should learn about very real-life things, such as politics. What you've got to do is get one of these kids to run for office, he insisted.
No.
Then you learn what politics is. Make real-life stuff. Find out why you had to be a certain age to run for office. In a rare media interview in 2017, Butler told The New Yorker that Tulsi, whom he's known virtually all her life, was a young girl who showed a real gravity and seriousness that was way beyond her years. She, however, has never been pictured with Butler and rarely speaks about him. Although she told The New Yorker about her gratitude to him and this wonderful spiritual practice he has given to me, she canceled a face-to-face interview with New York Magazine this year when the journalist said he wanted to talk about Butler and the SIF. It did not answer direct questions about them sent over email. So, and that group,
I feel like the 2017 was the end of her mentioning Chris Butler. Like, it's just been, I'm not going to talk about that ever since.
Yeah.
Despite, as you mentioned there, if you look at who her staffers are.
Yes.
Like, and people did, when she was running for president, people kind of dug into this. It is almost all of her critical staffers are Chris Butler insiders, oftentimes second generation, either the children or the nieces and nephews, including her second husband and her first husband, who was from a cult family.
Her current husband helps film the videos
Yeah.
Like
he's her
for this group.
videographer.
Yeah.
And also for the Chris Butler group. And
Yeah.
like he went to Syria with her and photographed her there with Dennis Kucinich. And she has this kind of, was it Sunil Khamenei was this other guy who is comes from a Butlerite family, or he's actually older. He's like a longer time follower of Chris Butler. And Tulsi kind of describes him as her spiritual uncle or something. But I think in the 2019 profile of her was it New York Magazine? Yeah. The Tulsi Gabbard Had a Very Strange Childhood from 2019 by Carrie Howley.
Yeah.
She mentions like riding around in a bus with Tulsi while she was like campaigning in 2019 for president. And Sunil Khamenei was just kind of there as this like shadowy handler, and he gave her his business card which like had his name on it but then just like no description of like what his role was. I think he just gave her like this interesting like blank business card, and she could tell that like this guy is like very much it says also accompanying her, this is from that article, with his sister, much like Kamala, like she also has her sister there as like a main sort of like chief of staff kind of handler kind of person, Vrindavan, I guess. And it says Vrindavan is a federal marshal currently on leave. This is Tulsi's sister. Tulsi's in the back holding hands with her husband, Abraham Williams, who says, "Watch your language, PG rated, please." Okay, whatever. Sus. In the car is the entire traveling staff, which is to say the candidate, her sister, and her husband, an aspiring cinematographer who, at 30, is 8 years her junior and consistently 2 feet away from her with a camera pointed at her face. Abraham has known Tulsi since childhood, when they both appeared at gatherings presided over by Chris Butler. He proposed 5 years ago on a surfboard. Also accompanying her to Iowa is a quiet, mustachioed campaign worker named Sunil Khamenei. He gives me his card, which is branded with the campaign's logo, but where a job title would typically go is empty white space. He runs a business owned by Chris Butler's wife, and former members of the sect say he is Butler's right-hand man. I mean, so, okay, her whole crew is like Butlerites.
Yeah.
She won't talk about him except one time where she actually says that he like she's very grateful for the spiritual practice, that he taught her. And it's also fucking weird.
I mean, it kind of goes back, to the Independence for Godly Government thing.
Right.
They did
which was in the 70s.
a dozen local races, in 1977. And then they had to, the Honolulu Advertiser, what that article said, had to investigate and show that these were, all Butler's disciples. This was a huge expose they had to publish, again, in 3 parts, because they were covering it up. And one of them told the newspaper, I know for a fact that if I said I was a Hare Krishna, the first thing people would think was that I had a shaved head, bells on my feet, and I bother people in the airport. He said, to communicate, I have to keep the doors open.
Yeah. Well, that I noticed. I think also maybe in Butler's Web or somewhere else, it mentioned, and you can see if you go to the many videos that have been uploaded of Chris Butler's 1980s TV lectures, that I think in the early 70s, Chris Butler kind of pivoted and adopted a very different aesthetic from the kind of mainstream Hare Krishnas for that exact reason. And, if you look at Chris Butler, he was well known in his early days as a real ladies' man, a handsome, kind of this handsome blonde surfer with these piercing blue eyes and tan skin. And he really kind of took this Hare Krishna thing and then paired it with almost a 70s, 80s, American beach yuppie aesthetic.
Yeah.
So that it was cool and sexy and successful and put together and not some kind of hippie thing. I think another thing I read that Prabhupada, when he went to Hawaii and was meeting with Chris Butler in the 70s, I think he specifically sort of instructed Butler to go out and recruit among the hippies. Because he said, I noticed that there's so many, he had some quote, I noticed there are so many in your society of drifting young people that they call the hippies. You should go among them and
that was like
basically like recruit among them.
Yeah, that was the whole like Hare Krishna methodology too, like in a way. Like that's why kind of they were so successful, was because like, you know, like I think George Harrison like kind of was involved with them for a while. Like they like
George
targeted
Harrison rizzed them the fuck up
like
hard.
They were like very like that's what kind of distinguished them from like other like similar groups that did like exist during that time that were kind of in a similar like new age Hindu fusion vein. That like that's kind of where they
and I think it is fascinating just to talk generally for a second about these groups in the early 70s and like the time period we're talking about, because there's like a number of them. I mean, some of them did start like contemporaneous with like the psychedelic part of the 60s. You know, I'm thinking like Meher Baba, I think came over kind of early, but you know, my sus alarm had to like go off a little bit when it's like I go and look up Hare Krishna and say, where did this exactly come from? And you find out that, you know, ISKCON was founded in New York City in, I think, 1966. And you're like, for like an Indian guru movement that I think claims to be like part of a hundreds-year-old tradition and blah, blah, blah. It's a little funny that it's like, oh, he came to New York, I guess with like 40 rupees in his pocket or something like that, you know, and started, you know, promoting this thing. But you really see it kick off like after the crest of like 1967, 68. And I guess what I'm driving towards is you have in the kind of blowout after 68, 69 into the Nixon era. And, you know, I think we talked about this in our Biodome, you know, Biosphere episode about these communes that started cropping up around like 1970, 71. And one interesting point of difference is a lot of these kind of groups and, you know, and then these Eastern religious groups also that were popping up. And you could even throw the Moonies into this because they had almost a little bit of like a hippie vibe, like of like young people hitting the streets and being whatever, you know, very, very like idealistic, you know, kind of thing. Is they weren't, you know, sometimes they were very hostile towards like psychedelics, and they're very much like, this is an alternative to just being like a drugged out hippie, you know, and like it gives you something kind of positive to believe in. You could look People's Temple also, something that starts to really kick off in like the early 70s where, you know, it's not about getting zonked out on drugs. And yet, but you know, at the same time, these are the groups that kind of get pinpointed as being like the biggest brainwashing groups of the 70s are these like new religious movement type groups that go after groups of what you would maybe call like wayward youths or hippies or, you know, young people, and suck them into these like high control group environments. And before you know it, they're like running around like selling flowers and pamphlets in like airports, and you know, they're all like zombies and everything. And it's like it all ends up in kind of the same dark like place where they're like kind of like mind controlled slaves, but often without, you know, it's not like they're being given like LSD all the time or anything like that. But it feels like, doesn't it feel like there's certain underlying mechanics that are like at play going on? And I find that like these guru led movements that start really popping up, like they suss me out when I'm thinking about like the long hand of MK Ultra or MK Search, which we still know very little about because all the files were destroyed. But I don't know. There's a lot of meat on the bone, you know, with kind of looking at these groups maybe as just like the Moonies serving certain intelligence purposes. Mm-hmm. Actually, before we go any further, because, you know, since we are basically talking about the Hare Krishnas, I remember posting this on Twitter in like 2017 or 2018, finding this New York Times article. I think when I was first looking into sus Tulsi and sus Chris Butler. And I think there's not a lot of information that you can find about this aspect of the Hare Krishnas, but, you know, let's just say there was one country where I think their true nature was accurately perceived in the early 1980s, and that, of course, was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, where the Hare Krishnas were very active trying to sort of penetrate in, you know, once they really got going. Along with India, by the way, where they have a big presence now, but like they started in the United States effectively, right? And then like went back to quote unquote India. Anyways, but I wasn't able to find the original article, but this is a good summary of it. This is in the New York Times, 1983. Soviet says Hare Krishna cloaks hide CIA daggers, by Serge Schmemann. And yeah, this is an interesting article, and I think it's good stuff to keep in mind as we walk through, this whole story and wind back to our possibly next director of national intelligence. Maybe this isn't so weird after all. Maybe we have our first indigo child CIA, chief coming up. But anyways, I'll just read some of this. They write, although no sightings have been reported yet of saffron-robed youths chanting rapturously in Soviet streets, the Hare Krishna movement seems to have made sufficient inroads into the Soviet Union to alarm the authorities. A major Soviet daily reported last year on the breakup of a Krishna chapter in the Siberian city of Krasnoyarsk and conviction of its leader for, quote, parasitism. The paper treated the movement as a kind of misguided idealism imported from the West that was deplorable because it lured people away from socially useful lives. The warning apparently went unheeded because Nedelya, the weekend supplement of Izvestia, has issued a far more alarmed and threatening report of doings of the sect. The journal reported the trial of leaders of a Krishna group in Moscow. Although the date, sentences, and charges were not specified, the authors of the article, Vadim Kassis and Leonid Kolosov, described the Krishna organization in the Soviet Union as a deliberate American, quote, diversion, whose victims become mentally warped and whose American leader was nothing less than an agent of the Central Intelligence Agency. The Soviet opposition to a new manifestation of religion is hardly surprising, and the attempt to brand the newly imported sect as somehow subversive recalled similar assaults on Christian denominations introduced from the West, like the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Pentecostals. This section, American woman expelled. Only recently, a young American woman working as a governess for American diplomats in Moscow was expelled after she was caught at a, quote, illegal gathering of Jehovah's Witnesses outside the capital. The Soviet press subsequently accused her of having a link to the CIA. But the attack on the Krishna sect stood out from the usual flow of anti-religious propaganda because the spread of the movement had been virtually unnoticed by Westerners here. One possible explanation for the official concern gleaned from the press reports was that the movement seemed to have taken root among the Soviet equivalent of a middle class, the better educated, urbanized, privileged youths, while earlier Christian sects had traditionally found followers among less educated rural people. The Krishna members identified in the Soviet articles included engineers, technicians, a budding athlete, and others with higher education. This young intelligentsia has shown increasing fascination in recent years with a whole range of ideas outside Soviet ideology, from exotic Eastern philosophies to extrasensory perception or faith healing, without reports of heavy resistance from the state. But the Hare Krishna movement appears to set off elemental anxieties in the Kremlin. After harrowing accounts of young people destroyed by the movement, Nedelya said, quote, "This, then, is the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, a pseudo-Hindu mystic religious sect, having a distinct anti-communist character. The Krishna, quote, movement calls for an escape from reality, since all existence is only illusion. Thus, a person need not be interested in the fruit of his work. He must abandon socially useful activities. He has no fatherland, no family, no close ones, only an all-embracing love for God." Accompanying the article was a photograph of Krishna members in full regalia on a Western street, with a caption terming them, quote, mindless. The Krishna sect was founded in the U.S. in 1966 by an Indian ascetic, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, calling on adherents to turn all their worldly possessions over to the society and to accept whatever duties are assigned by their guru. The shaven-headed youths in flowing robes with whitish smears on their foreheads, chanting and beating out rhythms on drums, have become a familiar sight on New York streets. 2 months ago, the daughter of Walter Reuther, the late labor leader, and the great-grandson of Henry Ford opened a Detroit mansion as a showpiece of the movement. That's funny, actually. I didn't realize that would be Henry Ford. That might be Henry Ford II's son. Became a Hare Krishna in the 80s. Interesting. Nedelya, however, did not dwell much on the Western manifestations of the sect, focusing instead on the Moscow chapter headed by Vladimir Kritsky, 32 years old, and Sergei Kurkin, 19, the defendants at the trial, who were accused of recruiting new members and disseminating the Krishna teachings. A woman, identified only as Yelena P., was described as a promising athlete when she fell in with the defendants in 1979. Suddenly, something happened to the girl, Nedelya said. It was as if she had been transformed. She disappeared from home, became rude, hysterical. She developed a barely concealed hatred for her parents. You're meat eaters, she told them, and when you die, you'll turn into pigs. The woman dropped out of her institute, and when her mother became terminally ill, she displayed only disdain. Thus, the life of a once cheerful, kind, life-loving girl was destroyed, and not hers alone. The fact is that the Krishnaists cannot return to their former normal life without psychiatric treatment. Why? Because the fundamental, quote, re-education in the sect is the state of ecstasy, in which the conjunction with fasting and exhausting prayer leads to destruction of the human personality. No, now U.S. Special Services accused. Luring people to such an antisocial stance, Nedelya said, was obviously the work of American Special Services. The agent in this case, the magazine asserted, was Robert Campagnola, described as one of the original 11 disciples of the guru of the Krishna sect. The Nedelya account opened with a scene of Mr. Campagnola stretched out on a couch in Moscow and having his feet ceremonially washed by a Soviet follower, a medical technician named Sergei Mitrofanov. But he was more than the emissary of the religion, Nedelya declared. Quote, after a closer and longer familiarity with the blessed tourist Robert Campagnola, there emerged highly curious elements from his biography. It turned out that Mr. Campagnola is a longtime agent of the CIA, specializing in ideological diversions. The goal, the journal said, is to, quote, control public opinion, to study the political orientation of this or that part of the population, to cause divisions in progressive movements, to gather information under the cover of missionary work. The article on the Krishna sect last year gave a considerably less pernicious account of the spread of the movement to the Soviet Union. It reported that the sect arrived via the International Book Fair in Moscow in 1979, when the Krishna movement's publishing arm, the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust of Los Angeles, was permitted an exhibit. It drew curious Russians, the book spread, and Hare Krishna was on its way to Russia. No. I remember looking into this guy, Robert Campagnola, who's mentioned in this article, to see if he really was a CIA agent. And I forget exactly, he's still around doing Hare Krishna shit. Actually, I think Hare Krishna Swami, yes, Hare Krishna Swami is his guru name. So I think I've seen his name maybe pop up in some of the Butler stuff. But this guy was an early follower of Prabhupada. Right? Yeah. Like right from New York in 1971. So after this was all set up, the leadership of ISKCON was divided among the 11 most prominent disciples of the guru. And Hare Krishna was one of them. So they were divided into different geographical preaching zones. Each zone was called Akarya. And the zone for Hare Krishna was Northern Europe, including Scandinavia, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and the Eastern European countries and the whole of the Soviet Union. So that would explain why he had the mandate to infiltrate the Soviet Union.
Is, like we were just talking about before we started recording, it is interesting that that does factor a little bit into the Chris Butler situation as well, because his father, Dr. Willis Butler, who also lived in Hawaii, was a pretty active socialist, sort of almost communist, sympathizing guy who, he was a big anti-war activist, a huge anti-imperialist activist, very involved in sort of student demonstrations and protests in Hawaii and things like that. He would often kind of write petitions and letters for sort of left-wing causes. We were talking about how he was very opposed to funding the Contras, and very he was very pro Sandinista. But
Dr. Willis Butler Jr., his father.
Yeah, Christine. Oh, Christine. I was gonna say Christine Grallo in that article, Butler's Web, did an interview with Kurt Butler, who was one of Chris Butler's brothers. His sort of theory on the whole issue was that, this was part of the reason why Chris Butler went the way that he did. She wrote, after high school, Chris Butler began classes at UH Manoa. He became deeply involved in the late 60s psychedelic counterculture scene in Honolulu, heavily exploring psychedelic drugs, as he documents in his 1970 booklet, Psy Speaks. He also explored yoga and meditation for a few years before he dropped out of college, started going by Psy Young, and declared himself a guru in his early 20s. Kurt and Chris Butler have long been estranged, and Kurt says they are philosophical polar opposites. Kurt said in an interview with Meanwhile in Hawaii that he believes Chris rebelled against their non-religious, communist-minded father by embracing religious fundamentalism and right-wing politics. Kurt said he disagrees with his brother's portrayal of himself as a guru, and he expressed concern for his brother's followers. He is indoctrinating his followers into a life of know-nothingism and ignorance, while giving them the delusion that they know everything that really matters, Kurt Butler said of his brother. Kurt also said his biggest beef with Chris, back when they still communicated, was Chris's staunch anti-science stance. He used to believe there is abundant life on the moon because the scriptures say so, said Kurt. Ergo, the U.S. moon landings must be a hoax. I don't know whether he still believes such nonsense. That's interesting. So he believes that there's moon people.
And the moon landing never happened.
That's an interesting way of arriving at that conclusion.
It sure is. It sure is. But it is interesting how potentially, the way his brother lays it out there, that this is an interesting case study. When we put on our In This House sign, the 60s were a psyop, but the 60s in quotation marks. Obviously not all of it was a psyop, but there's an interesting thing here of the CIA decided that they were going to target even the boomers that were raised by communist sympathizing left-wing activist parents would get psyoped by the larger first the psychedelic thing, and then the sort of new age but actually crypto right-wing sort of authoritarian MK cult kind of thing. And so and all in the name of rebelling against dad, rebelling against anybody over 30, man, but in the most reactionary way possible.
Chris Butler did say in a lecture, he said he claimed his family was driven out of Louisiana and tracked by the CIA when he was a quote unquote baby due to his family's communist and civil rights stances.
He did say that.
So,
he did say that.
He did
so, I mean, it might be a little more literal.
A known to the CIA his whole life, basically, since he was a baby.
He's been tracked by his family has been tracked by the targeted individuals
and,
in a way.
Pushed out of Louisiana and I guess forced to Hawaii or something. Yeah.
Like an absolute hub of military intelligence, intrigue and everything. I honestly had to wonder, did Chris Butler's father ever socialize? Because Hawaii's not that big of a place, especially if you're a communist. Did he ever kind of hang out with Obama's mom and Obama's grandparents?
Oh, that is a good question. I didn't even think about that. But
Frank Marshall Davis.
I wouldn't be surprised. It seems like he was really, really to the left. He might have been further left than those people, but maybe.
But in general, I mean, he was definitely big with one of the longshoreman labor bosses or labor leaders, and was involved in protests and everything else. So I don't know, but that's another interesting milieu to grow up in and then rebel that hard against. And actually, I did a little further digging into his genealogy, and I was able to find I don't know I don't know how much we can actually glean from this, but it is interesting that his father's father, so Chris Butler's grandfather, was a man named Dr. Willis Pollard Butler Sr., who is a doctor from Louisiana, who I believe went to Vanderbilt and then Columbia Medical School. And he's actually kind of a famous early 20th century doctor for a couple different reasons. I guess he became the longtime coroner of his home county in Caddo Parish, Louisiana. But also he was a very cutting edge scientist in a few different fields, both in the field of criminal investigation and also addiction health. So Chris Butler's grandfather established something called the Shreveport Narcotic Clinic in, I think, 1919. This was a morphine maintenance clinic to treat morphine addicts. And he was actually a kind of a cutting edge guy of rehabilitation, not incarceration, as a way of dealing with like drug addiction, and he experimented. I don't want to make this sound like more sinister because this is decades before MK Ultra, but also early 20th century medicine is a little rough around the edges, right? But but it sounds like, you know, he was all about treating the underlying causes of what he saw as the disease of addiction, which is not a common way to think about it back then, and would try out all these other things. But then Prohibition kind of threw a wrench, I guess, in the regular maintenance of this place, and I think he had to shut it down in the early 1920s. But then it's been like referred to in subsequent decades as like an early experiment in addiction treatment and, you know, yada, 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 all these other things. And then he became the coroner in Caddo Parish, Louisiana for like decades. And I guess he pioneered things in like criminal forensics and like how to do autopsies and things like that to like figure out, you know, to solve crimes and things like that. So, and then he lived to be like 105 or something. Like he was the oldest living like graduate of Vanderbilt for a while or something like that. So he had like people interviewed him much later into his life. Like when Chris Butler would have been already starting his cult, his grandfather was like, you know, in his 90s and 100s. And I think he died maybe in the 80s. Or no, 1991. Wow. So he was born in 1888. Strong genes, I guess. But so that was okay. So no, he went to Drawn Business College in Shreveport, then transferred to Columbia University, and then went to Vanderbilt Medical School. And actually, for a while, took a job handling gross pathology, autopsies, and poisons at Bellevue Hospital in New York. The infamous Bellevue Hospital. So, I mean, that's about, you know, so then his son becomes a doctor who becomes kind of like a left-wing communist kind of guy. Apparently, I don't know, gets gang stalked by the CIA and has to like
according
flee
to Chris
Louisiana.
Butler, who, you know,
according
that
to Chris
could
Butler,
not be true, but I mean, I don't know.
Well, but it also, I mean, in a sense,
it wouldn't be
it should
totally
be true.
crazy because, like, you know, the CIA definitely did have an interest in like prominent like leftists, and this guy was like definitely an activist who was like known. Like, there's a big paper trail of like his political activities, so you'd think that like there would be an interest in him, you know.
Right, and especially because, I mean, Butler's a boomer, probably born in the 40s. I think he was born in the 40s, like either during or right after
like
World War II.
really the heyday of like
Red
HUAC,
Scare,
when this guy was like in, you know, doing all this stuff. Yeah,
right. This is peak McCarthyism. He's a guy who had to like get out of Dodge and like go kind of hide out in Hawaii, but then he was still pretty throughout the rest of his life, like pretty hardcore about kind of like left-wing issues, which you know is the type of person, you know, a doctor, son of a kind of prominent doctor, etc.
Yeah, it was like kind of an organizer. Like, yeah, it's sort of like
and like, you know, and the Hawaii being like a huge military hub, like it was. I think that, you know, I think it's actually not the craziest thing that they'd have their eye on him, and I don't know. It's a murky world. At the same time, like I would like to know if he was, kind of in those like Dunham Obama circles as well in terms of like activism and all these things. But then, you know, his boomer son decides he's going to rebel against the man, which in this case is communist because his dad is, and then decides to embrace like the most right-wing shit under the veneer of being like spiritually enlightened, which is pretty much our whole critique of like the 60s and how it executes like this sort of like jujitsu move where, you know, like you think you're moving towards liberation, but actually you're like reifying like the worst values of like the old society in new psychedelic tie-dye colors, you know? And like Chris Butler's kind of like a great example of like that sad generational arc. And honestly, when you look at like the other generation of politicians that particularly in the Democratic Party that Tulsi came up with, I'm thinking about Pete Buttigieg and Kamala, they also have this weird background of having kind of like academic elite left-wing parents.
True.
And then they just become these like weird sus-ass like neoliberal centrists. Like in a way, maybe to like rebel a little bit against their like lib parents, but they were lib in the Reagan era. So that was like annoying and they want, I don't know. But it's regrettable that
yeah, I mean, like, that's true of that's definitely true of Chris Butler. Like, however, like to bring it back to like Tulsi a little bit, it is interesting talking about like her parents, right? Like, because Mike Gabbard also like, and her mother also had like I forget what it was it Carol? I think it might have been Carol. Either way,
Carol.
Mrs.
Carol.
Gabbard.
Yeah.
No, Carol Gabbard.
Yeah,
yeah, they
Carol.
also had a political career, but like the way they entered politics, like, at first was like it seems like they were almost like borderline like Westboro Baptist Church type people. Like they were like basically like single issue like anti like homosexuality politicians. Like that was like their whole thing. Like when they first were like basically on like at Butler's direction entering politics. Like this is like a funny anecdote that like in 1999, after one of the main characters in the teen drama Dawson's Creek was revealed to be gay, Mike Gabbard flew to North Carolina where the program was filmed to lead a protest.
Oh my God. That really is almost Westboro Baptist Church. Like we really can't stress enough how obsessed with like anti-homosexuality they were. Like how obsessed with gay stuff.
It was their
Chris
single,
Butler and his
their
followers
single
were.
issue. Yeah.
Their most
Like-
overarching issue. And, even Tulsi got some flack for this, where by the time she ran for Congress in 2012, she had kind of like, she had made comments before, I think maybe when her father was running for Congress or whatever, like that in 2004, when that was the big, anti-gay marriage amendment year, I think she had made some comments to the press about, how, gay marriage is bad and blah, blah, blah. By 2012, she was like, no, I support LGBTQ
Yeah, she's like,
rights.
I evolved.
But then she gave an interview maybe a little bit after that where she like clarified that like her personal views about it had not changed. She just realized that like the government should stay out of people's personal lives. And then I think around 2016, some people like kind of side-eyed her for like, oh wait, so you still think that like homosexuality is evil? Like
this is from the New Yorker. Yeah, in her first political incarnation, Gabbard balanced liberal environmentalism with a pronounced conservative streak. This is like very basically typical Chris Butler. In 2003, she voted against a bill to oblige hospitals to provide emergency contraception immediately to survivors of sexual assault because it did not contain a conscience clause to allow providers with religious objection to opt out. She supported government surveillance efforts, warning that the demand for unfettered civil liberties could make the nation vulnerable to terrorists. This is, you can almost see how these are all Chris Butler's obsessions. That's another thing about Chris Butler. Chris Butler hates Muslims. Like, I want to read like some of his quotes about like Muslims in a bit, but so these are all like kind of his hangups. And she joined her father's battle against what she called homosexual extremists. In 1998, Mike Gabbard had successfully pushed for an amendment to the Hawaii state constitution to permit the legislature to ban same-sex marriage, which it did. 6 years later, Tulsi Gabbard led a protest against a bill that would have legalized civil unions for same-sex couples. That same year, in the Hawaii State House, she delivered a long, fierce speech against the proposed resolution meant to target anti-gay bullying in public schools. She objected to the idea of students being taught that homosexuality is normal and natural, and worried that passing the resolution would have the effect of inviting homosexual advocacy organizations into our schools to promote their agenda to our vulnerable youth. As Gabbard was settling into her political career in 2003, she did something surprising. She joined the National Guard, blah, 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 like, I don't know why
because of 9/11. Because of 9/11.
Yeah, I don't know why that's surprising, because I feel like a lot of people like do that in order to get into politics, but whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, then she did her whole like evolution on LGBT issues, which basically was necessary for her to win.
Didn't she credit it that I think she said later on that it was her experience in Iraq that changed her mind because she saw.
Of course, yeah.
She took for granted the civil liberties that we have that these Muslim tyrannical societies don't.
I didn't even hear that spin on it. Yeah, I heard like
I read that last
her
night.
say I saw more of the world. I'm like, Iraq? Like what? You saw like prisoners being sodomized by like your comrades? Like
the way she framed it was like she realized that like Arabs and Muslims were also anti-gay, and like her hatred of them like trumps all other hatreds. So she's like, oh fuck, okay, actually critical support for gay people because like you can't be gay in Gaza, etc.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of like framed in that way. Like, but I mean, she says it in like, I realize that like what we have is like, our civil liberties are something that are like special and that we respect other people because other countries like Iraq, like they don't respect other people's ways of life and they just want to impose Islam on everybody. Like it was a little crazy. Is like that's what made you think that like gay rights are okay? Like okay, like interesting,
Yeah, well, yeah, I think like relative to that, it might be like good to see what like Chris Butler like has to say because you don't really like see this like in most of the sort of public videos. You know, some of them have leaked out, and there's like a lot of like, well, fewer than you would think, given like how, you know, the retaliation, as one of them actually said, like, you know, verbatim, like the retaliation is real. And,
yeah.
Like,
he's like, we're joking
about
him, but he's a scary motherfucker, especially if you're in Hawaii. Like, he's got goons, right?
Yes. So, you know, but you could definitely like there are people who will attest to like the reality of Chris Butler and what it's actually like in this group. But you can see, this is just an example. While much of the content deals with Hinduism, Hare Krishna believes in general, this is from the Byline Times, the Islamophobic worldview of Tulsi Gabbard's guru. While much of the content of his lectures deals with Hinduism, Hare Krishna believes in general and the virtues of sexual and moral purity, Butler's lectures are laced throughout with what can only be described as extreme hostility towards both Muslims and homosexuals. They, Muslims, are demons. They're demons that go, Allah, la, 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 la. It's bullshit. But everyone is afraid of them, and Christians are so fucking passive. So-called Christians are just watching the F slurs for gay people take over. Watching the Muslims cut their throats. They're just cowards because they're afraid to tell the truth in case of what happens, says Butler in one lecture, whose words are followed by the encouraging laughter of his followers. In another, he says, there's absolutely no value in putting this dog shit, that is Islam, in the putting up with this dog shit in the name of tolerance. He then goes on to compare Islam with communism, arguing that once communists come to power, you're dead, you're finished, you're gone. It's the same with the so-called Muslims. One of Butler's central themes about Islam,
he's calling us out right now. He's calling us out across the board.
Yeah. One of Butler's central themes about Islam is his claim that it is a religion spread exclusively by the sword, and he dismisses the idea that Muslims are capable of finding their faith on their own accord through inspiration or logic. I'm not in a mood to be tolerant towards so-called Muslims. I don't know why he keeps saying so-called, but whatever. The fact is that Muhammad got his followers with the sword, and ever since that time, they developed their philosophy. Their philosophy is you get your swords, you go to another country, and then you get your swords, and then you put your swords to the throats of the people in that country, and you say, worship as we worship God, or we will kill you. Butler also falsely claims that Islam spread to India and destroyed Hinduism. This would become a theme for Tulsi, contending that when the Muslim invaders entered India, they engaged in the most demonic of activities, and that instead of having faith in God, they engaged in demonic activism to force people into becoming members of their own team, or their so-called religion by force, including smashing Hindu temples, erecting mosques in their place, and shoving meat into the mouths to make them so-called Muslims, so that they'll no longer be accepted by Hindu society. He is also fond of mocking Islamic culture and claims that Muslims are producers of art only because their religion does not permit illustrations of the Prophet Muhammad. Muslims make a lot of nice paintings, he says. A lot of scribbles. Ever see a Muslim rug? It's very beautiful, very fancy, all kinds of scribbles. Why? Because they can't depict anything other than scribbles or they go to jail. They think God is a scribble. When they leave this body, all they'll see is scribbles and flowers and onions and the sword, of course. These tapes make clear that Butler views Islam as a geopolitical threat and a potent source of global instability. And it is through this lens that Butler views all geopolitical struggles, including the 70-year-long rivalry between India and Pakistan over Kashmir, claiming, now these nutcases are trying to get the atom bomb. Oh great, accept Allah or we blow up your country? There's only one reason Pakistan hasn't dropped atom bombs in India. That's because there are 200 million Muslims still in India. As soon as they leave, boom! He also criticizes the U.S. for protecting Saudi Arabia from Saddam Hussein during the first Gulf War, telling his audience, fuck these guys. They shouldn't have defended these guys. They should have said, fuck you. So
you can see why Steve Bannon feels like she really gets the foreign policy stuff.
And you can see why she really gets it, because this is someone who didn't go to school. Like, I'm not saying it's bad to homeschool your kids. However, like, this is who she was homeschooled by. And like she even went to like some like abusive like institute in the Philippines, like that was just nonstop like this all day. Like this is like basically this guy teaches that he is God. You know,
her parents ran a school like solely based on this guy's teachings.
Yeah,
like on top of that, so like this is her entire world is this guy, and this is what this guy was preaching throughout her entire childhood.
Yeah. Also in the New Yorker article, there is this quote from Butler where in one lecture he acknowledged the potential for skepticism, offering followers his version of Pascal's wager. If I'm not the representative of God and you dovetail your will with mine, your life is destroyed, he said, and if I am the representative of God and you don't dovetail your will with mine, then your life is wasted.
Okay.
So there you go.
Very confident.
Yeah, maybe they meant your life is not destroyed. It's kind of weird. So it's like, that is a very weird way of saying it. It's not really Pascal's wager. It's kind of like, your life is going to be destroyed if I'm not the representative of God, but, don't waste your life by, it's, all right. Yeah. So basically, like, this guy's like the architect of her entire political career. Like the whole idea of her like branding herself as a transcendental Hindu was his like vision. Even though like, a lot of people attest that like in the group itself, like Hindu that's a kind of a thing. Like, and this is true. It's true of Sufism too. Like it's true of a lot of like mystical traditions, like not really big on like, and this is like how I think Tulsi kind of spins it as like, I'm anti-sectarian, no, I don't believe in discrimination against anybody. It's about sectarianism. Like they basically like, and this is again a common thing where it's like, oh, even Hindu is like just a word that they like transcend through their mystical practice. Like it's kind of like that famous Rumi poem that everyone gets tattooed, even though they translate it wrong, where he says like, it's beyond Islam.
Beyond good and evil.
Yeah, they translate it as like beyond good and evil, but what it actually is like beyond Islam and kufr. Because it's about the sort of mystical state where those words cease to have meaning, where the like these sort of signs for these things no longer, pertain. And that's kind of what she's like saying, like, and that's kind of what they believe. Like Hindu is just a designation, God has many, many different names, like there's no Christian God, there's no Muslim God, there's simply God, but that is, they can reconcile that with the idea that like these quote unquote so-called Muslims are like savages and they must all be destroyed and like are the ultimate threat to the world. And that is like what she thinks. Like that's like what she still believes to this day. And like with an ascendant India, which has shown that it is willing to undertake intelligence operations and even assassinations in Canada. And it's very interesting that someone who like not only has like the ideological sympathies with the world, like the views of like the most like fanatical Hindu nationalists, but also like deep financial ties, because like that is really where like once, obviously she had to like strategize a little bit to get out there, become a viable candidate in Hawaii. But also, like, a lot of big, like, Hindu boosters in the U.S. Are, like, financiers of Tulsi. Like, they're huge.
Right. You found this article from the Caravan magazine about her BJP and RSS kind of connections, right? Doing events with, what is it called? The American Song?
Yeah, that's what they call it.
Okay, this is like the sort of like pro-Modi Indian lobby in the United States?
Yeah, basically. Well, like the diasporic, like Hindu nationalists, the one like that are increasingly being mobilized by like the RSS and the BJP sort of groups, and like so. Yeah, a lot of like her early funding, comes from those sort of wealthy people. Yeah, like among Gabbard's many donors are various members of the U.S. chapters of groups such as the Hindu Swayam Sevak Sangh, the Overseas Friends of the BJP, and the Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America. Thanks to her connection to the leading figures of the American Song, that's basically sort of their term for the like this sort of group, this larger group of groups, such as Vijay Pallad, a businessman from Texas, Bharat Bharai, an oncologist from the Chicago region, and Mihir Meghani, a physician from California, she has been eagerly welcomed at many Sangh fundraisers around the country. Even as mainstream interfaith groups refuse to participate in events hosted by the American Sangh, Gabbard repeatedly spoke at its events, in the United States and abroad. While organizations such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have published reports warning about the spread of Hindu nationalist violence under Modi's administration, Gabbard has called India an indispensable partner to the United States and pushed for enhanced cooperation between the two countries. Gabbard's donors have publicly applauded her for supporting Modi before he was elected, for speaking against the U.S. decision to deny him a visa after 2002, and for working against congressional efforts to recognize human rights violations in India.
Yeah. I want to read this like anecdote from, because this writer went to a Los Angeles rally for Tulsi for president in March 2019.
Yeah.
And there were some protesters outside who were like, Indian immigrant protesters that were saying, like, she supports the people I ran from in India, etc. But she talks about inside this event because it's funny, speaking of people getting took by people getting psyop by Tulsi.
Yeah.
This kind of demonstrates it. They write, the mood inside the hall was different. As she concluded her speech, the crowd chanted, Tulsi, Tulsi. The MC, Jimmy Dore, a comedian who hosts a popular YouTube show
I didn't even
and is a
notice that when I
Gabbard
read
supporter.
this.
Yeah, Jimmy Dore. Like he was definitely like poster boy of people who fucking fell for like the Tulsi's and
absolutely.
Heckin left.
Perfect example.
Though maybe he is he a Trump supporter now? I don't even know, but like he definitely was that alt left. Like was he in the Young Turks?
He was like forced to vote Medicare for all, but then he
Right.
was kind of like Russell Brand is awesome. I think he probably is a Trump supporter now. I don't know. But yeah.
I wonder if he still loves Tulsi, because I feel like people that became like Joe Rogan, like he loves Tulsi, he fucking loves Tulsi, she fucking rules, But anyway, so Jimmy Dore's there. He opens the floor up for questions. As hands went up all around, he pointed to me. Aware that my prepared question was about to strike a discordant tone, I removed my hat and glasses. Oh, it's getting serious, Gabbard joked. So they asked the question. In your first 2 terms in office, you met the RSS spokesperson at least 3 times, I said. You spoke at many RSS events, including 2 in India. When did your collaboration with the RSS begin, and how much money have they given you? The usually unflappable Gabbard, who speaks with slow deliberation, grimaced. She paused long enough for an audience member to shout, "Speak up!" Finally, she responded, "I am a soldier, and I took an oath," she began. One oath in my life. Interesting. One oath in my life. That was an oath to serve and protect this country, to put my life on the line for the people of this country. She grew more emphatic. We stand for aloha. We stand for diversity. We stand for peace and bringing people together around these shared ideals of freedom and opportunity for all people. Gesturing to the audience to stand, she continued, "Thank you, everybody, for standing with me. It is this kind of attacks that are rooted in religious bigotry that we must stand together and condemn. Whether these attacks are being targeted at Hindus or Buddhists or Muslims or Jews or atheists or Catholics, we must stand united and condemn this hate and bigotry because an attack against one of us is an attack against all of us." Again, the crowd chanted, "Tulsi, Tulsi." No. Oh my God, it's so sus. She says, they say that this is typical of how Gabbard responds to questions about the depth of her relationship with Modi, her association with affiliates of the Sangh Parivar, the family of organizations working with the RSS, or the identity of many of her key donors. Such queries are dismissed as signs of, quote, Hindu phobia. When an article in The Intercept, interesting, Omidyar, famous Modi booster, right? When an article in The Intercept described her as, quote, a rising progressive star. Despite her support for Hindu nationalists, Gabbard lashed out with an opinion piece for Religion News Service headlined, "Religious Bigotry is Un-American." She said her critics were trying to foment anti-Hindu sentiment. Yet, as they say, the devil is in the details. Right. Oh, yeah, I forgot that they... Interesting Intercept. Yeah, it's like Pierre Omidyar was very instrumental in, like, funding Modi's, I think, like presidential campaign and like getting him elected president in India.
Really? Is that true?
Oh yeah. That was something that Dave Emery brought up when he did his Tulsi thing years ago, was that she had some connection, or that, like The Intercept. I mean, Pierre Omidyar, he's kind of gone, another PayPal mafia guy, right? But then at the same time, he might have shifted on Modi a little bit. Because I'm seeing in the Commune Mag in 2023 that Soros and Pierre Omidyar, his Omidyar network, and the Ford Foundation were giving money to like anti-Modi NGOs. Yeah, and Modi was like cracking down on them. So I'm not sure exactly.
Is Dave Emery like mistaken about this? I'm trying to find like
this. I
this.
don't think he was. Omidyar Network India to exit country, stop new investments, December 2023. Huh. Yeah, so I think there might have been... I remember reading about this at the time, because that was like a big bugbear with Dave Emery, was that Pierre Omidyar was sus, the Snowden thing was sus, all the WikiLeaks shit was sus, and that was like one evidence that like maybe this guy isn't such like a heckin leftist billionaire, because he's like low-key down. Let me see. Yeah, they've really done a good job of wiping it out.
I hadn't heard that, and I'm like, yeah. But
mystery solved. Left-wing billionaire Pierre Omidyar is behind a dark money group. Here we go. All right. I had to go back to a blog from 2014, uncommonthought.com. Originally published at Empire Burlesque. Omidyar and the Oligarch's Code, Enabling Extremism, Monetizing Dissent. So they write here, okay, this is key info. India is now in the hands of Narendra Modi, a lifelong member of an unabashedly neo-fascist paramilitary group. That's the RSS. His chief claim to fame is presiding over the wanton slaughter of more than 2,000 Muslims as a provincial chief minister and getting away with it. A staunch neoliberal as well as a neo-fascist, he is preparing to unleash the by now standard shock doctrine tactics of the pernicious neoliberal cult on the whole country. Unrestricted corporate rapine, aided by a heavy-handed, all-surveilling militarist state, waging war on the poor and the very notion of a common good. What is surprising is that Modi's rise to power has been aided for years by substantial support, direct and indirect, from an American billionaire widely regarded by the left as one of the world's great champions of dissent, Pierre Omidyar. But perhaps this is not so surprising when you consider that Omidyar now stands to reap millions, if not billions of dollars, from Modi's vow to open up India's burgeoning e-commerce market to foreign companies, like Omidyar's eBay, as Mark Ames reported at Pando Daily, which was funded by Peter Thiel. So, we got that intra-PayPal mafia kind of a competition happening again. Ames provides a detailed look at Omidyar's extensive involvement with Modi and his sinister movement. The story could serve as a companion piece to Ames's earlier investigation into Omidyar's relentless efforts to, quote, monetize philanthropy, turning it into a money-making tool for a small elite while wreaking havoc among those it is ostensibly trying to help. A key element in this monetization of human misery on the part of Omidyar and his cronies is the privatization of state services aimed at providing some measure of support, opportunity, and social justice for ordinary people. In country after country, our neoliberal extremists are pushing policies to turn every aspect of human community into profitable enterprises under corporate control. So, to do this, of course, one must also monetize democracy itself. Thus, as Ames and others have pointed out, Omidyar has also been active in pro-democracy NGOs and other organizations in foreign countries, working closely with Washington to bring down regimes considered insufficiently open to the strip mining of national wealth and resources by Western elites. The aim, as in Ukraine, where Omidyar's partnership with government was particularly active, is to replace the regimes with technocrats willing to stick the shock doctrine cattle prod to their own people. The nature of the regime being overthrown doesn't matter, by the way. It might be an ugly corruptocracy like the Yanukovych regime in Ukraine, or populist movements like the long-running attempts to overthrow Chavismo in Venezuela, or liberal democracies like the government overthrown in Honduras with Barack Obama's collusion in the early days of his hope and change presidency. Likewise, it doesn't matter what kind of regime replaces the government targeted for overturning. Saddam Hussein's brutal secular authoritarianism was replaced by brutal sectarian authoritarianism in Iraq, one closely allied to Iran no less. Gaddafi's secular authoritarianism in Libya was supplanted with NATO bombs by religious radicals allied with al-Qaeda, who are now apparently in the process of being overthrown in turn by American-backed military authoritarians, etc. The secular authoritarianism in Syria is being attacked by Western-backed rebels, led by perhaps the most vicious religious fanatics on earth, a Ukrainian government dominated by dodgy oligarchs, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. So let me see if there's any more stuff about like what Omidyar actually did.
I found something that may be like the substances. This is also like, I also got this like tip from like a very like sort of like pro-Tulsi account, like actually in Mint Press News, but like sort of responding to Omidyar's, this particular article that was just mentioned. The article homed in on Gabbard's relationship with American supporters of Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India and the leader of a party, the BJP, that has stoked lethally violent attacks on Muslims in the past. The article based its case partly on the arguably bigoted assertion that Gabbard has many donors with names that are of Hindu origin. Obviously, that's not like the reason, like, you know, as we'll talk about in a second further. But, you know, people like Michael Tracy apparently defended her on this basis. Because, again, this is the sort of simping for Tulsi that happens where it's like, they're being Hindu-phobic. Like, no. Like, these are actually like, anyway, but whatever. So this article, you know, in terms of the Omidyar thing, says that this Omidyar's outlets publish material criticizing Gabbard on the basis of her connections to the BJP, but this raises serious questions of hypocrisy. Jayant Sinha, former member of Omidyar's 5-member Global Executive Committee and managing director of the Omidyar Network's India branch, whose shady financial practices were detailed in the Panama Papers, is a member of Modi's cabinet and oversaw the effort to put Modi in power while heading the Omidyar Network in India. Sinha, in fact, used Omidyar's funding to bankroll a series of anti-corruption campaigns through local NGOs that helped subvert the Indian public's faith in the ruling center-left Congress Party. In July, Sinha honored 8 men who were convicted of lynching a Muslim cattle trader by placing wreaths of marigolds over their heads after they were bailed out of prison. So, there's a connection there. Yeah, this is another article on it. In a big crackdown, the Central Bureau of Investigation on Wednesday registered a case against Indian promoters of the U.S.-based Omidyar network and 36 other NGOs and 6 Home Ministry officials for violations and bribery and foreign contribution forms. CBI arrested 14 persons and conducted raids at 40 locations and recovered cash of Rs. 3.21 crore, several incriminating documents, 3.21 crore rupees. Omidyar Network is a multinational NGO promoted by eBay founder Pierre Omidyar, blah, blah, blah. For the past 12 years, Omidyar Network was heavily funded in India until mid-2014. BJP MP and former minister Jayant Sinha was closely associated with the U.S.-based NGO's India operations.
He was a former McKinsey partner, by the way, Jayant Sinha.
Yeah.
And a Harvard Business School guy. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess he was the main link with Omidyar and the BJP. And there was the India Foundation, I guess, which was incubating Sinha's pro-business agenda, targeting the quote-unquote Maoists. And yeah, so he quit the Omidyar network, Sinha did, to advise Modi's campaign. Yeah, there's really like a lot. And then, and this was the Janagraha anti-corruption NGO that was funded by the Omidyar network, was enthusiastically supported by USAID officials like Sarah Mendelson, who described herself as a, quote, convert in 2011 after hearing a Janagraha official's spellbinding speech describing the NGO's work. Following year, Mendelson announced a $55 million USAID program, making all voices count, with Omidyar Network as one of its 4 principal partners, explaining to Congress the program's larger political purpose, quote, "The political trajectory of a country is ultimately a U.S. national security issue, and as such, we are intimately involved in advancing U.S. national security interests."
Yeah, it's interesting. So I kind of see the connection, like, in a way, to like kind of put it simply. It seems like this guy was a managing director and the head of India investments at Omidyar Network, which may be like whatever, again, I'm not saying Omidyar is good, like, because he, like, funds the Intercept or anything like that. Obviously he's completely sus. But it seems like this guy who was like in charge, like, kind of, it's like kind of a little bit hypocritical that he's now Omidyar would now criticize Modi, or that he would like be upset about this outcome, because it seems like this guy basically was directing all of its investments in India, and then he jumped ship to basically be like a member of Modi's cabinet, of his administration.
Right.
So it kind of was like, this massive investment in India, like as they were describing, kind of, this is an article actually from the Time. While it is not known what Sinha's next move will be, after him quitting the Omidyar network, the exit comes at a significant time, just ahead of the country's upcoming Lok Sabha or general elections, expected around May. Sinha, earlier with McKinsey and Company and Courage Capital Management, is also Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP leader, and former Finance Minister Yashwant Sinha's eldest son. The BJP is one of several political parties that will contest the upcoming Lok Sabha polls. Is the former McKinsey executive now priming for a career in politics? Wouldn't be surprising. Sinha joined Omidyar Network in late 2009, a couple of years after it had started investing directly in India. During this stint, Omidyar's profile has grown to 35-odd companies, totaling investments worth over $100 million. Meanwhile, Omidyar Network operations for India are currently being overseen by Madhukar and Dimple Sanghi, director, investments, blah, blah, blah. So...
I'm looking at this recent article from opindia.com, or this is from December 2023, so almost a year ago, announcing like the Omidyar network is like exiting India, basically, and like winding down all its investments. But it mentions a few times here that conspicuously, Omidyar Network is known for funding many publications, particularly the leftist portals across India, including Scroll.in and News Laundry. So they might be saying conspicuously because there might be, like, he might have executed a pivot now where he's seen as like Soros, like, you know, he's like an anti-Modi, like leftist billionaire guy. But it is interesting, just like how he funded The Intercept, that he made sure to fund, like, I guess would have become very popular sort of left-wing news portal websites are like funded by Omidyar Network.
Maybe he was trying to, like, you know,
Control
I guess you
both
could say that
sides.
I guess you could say that, like, maybe he had some like sinister motive, but another way of reading it could be that, like, he just didn't understand like Indian politics at all, but was trying to make like a huge profit on Indian media, and actually kind of got worked a little bit by like the people who he like delegated those responsibilities to, and then afterwards it's like, oh no, like what? Oh, this is bad, and then tried to, like, you know.
But I feel like
and then
there's a
ultimately
sus
kind of
reason.
had to like retreat and pull out, you know.
But it's not like anybody really like got like did he suffer at all for people like tying him to the BJP? Like, not really. I mean, people reported on it, but like he didn't. I feel like most people don't know that about him or like think about that at all.
Yeah, that's true.
I do see
but
here.
I mean, it doesn't have to be that like he like
it was like he
cared
wanted
about
fascism.
wanting them to be in power so much as, like, as you said, it doesn't,
because they were
affect him one way or
neoliberal
the other.
extremists.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's just like I think you could maybe draw a parallel to another country that Omidyar dumped a bunch of money into, Ukraine, where I don't think, as morally disgusting as it is, that these like NATO Atlanticist, like American, you know, and like Western European people like see the Azov battalion. It's like, yeah, like let's put Nazis back in power. We love that. It's more like these guys are down to be, they hate Russia and they're down to be like neoliberal Western stooges. And like the fact that they're Nazis is like we'll just ignore that. Like, you know, like it's more a game of like cognitive dissonance of
Or
like no, they just like love development and growth.
It seems like similar
like,
where, you know, like they're saying like, oh, you know, this like corruption effort, at least the, you know, the Mint Press article was saying that like, oh, you know, the Omidyar Network was a huge factor in this, you know, corruption effort that undermined, you know, this corruption investigation and the media around it that undermines the public's faith in the ruling center-left party. Like, I could see like them being like, yeah, like we're cleaning up this like third world country that like has a lot of corruption and like, but meanwhile they're actually like empowering, like, you know, the BJP. It's like these people, you know, like, yeah, like our McKinsey, like, you know, trained, you know, McKinsey accredited managing director, like he's got a good head on his shoulders. Like he wouldn't see the country astray. Like I'm sure that he shares our exact, like, you know, secular, like democratic values. And like he knows how to steward this country. It's, oh, wait, like he believes in like, you know, India is Bharat, you know, like Hindu Rashtra, etc. Oops, you know.
Yeah.
I
So I don't know.
That being the case, or it could
I'm
just
not
be
sure what
not caring. And
well, their official reason for shutting down is that they have accomplished all their objectives in India. So I mean, yeah, I guess like they did start getting shit from like government agencies that I guess were controlled by the BJP for like funding these quote unquote leftist news portals, and like there was some kind of I don't know, friction. They said that they achieved their primary objective of, quote, catalyzing impact and will not make any new investment. The statement read, over the past decade, Omidyar Network India has played a critical role in building the impact investment sector, especially focused on the next $500 million. We are proud of our work in this space, which is now attracting larger pools of capital from local venture capital or impact investors and domestic philanthropists than ever before. Having achieved our primary objective of catalyzing impact, Omidyar Network India will not be making any further investments in India. So yeah, I mean, okay, interesting. But you know what he was doing in the last, like this was reported in the Washington Free Beacon right-wing website from February 2023. Omidyar was unmasked as being behind a dark money group that has kept its donors secret for nearly a year and is leading a corporate boycott campaign against Twitter owner Elon Musk. Wow. So, I mean, PayPal Mafia, they be fighting, allegedly.
The other angle that
they all work together. They're all. I'm sorry. Wait, Omidyar was PayPal Mafia, right?
I'm actually not sure if he was a member of the PayPal Mafia.
Oh, he bought PayPal in 2002. I know Elon and Peter Thiel like actually work together.
Well, he's definitely in that milieu.
Yeah, he's part of the. They said they all know each other.
Whether
they
he's
all
a member
know
of
each
that
other.
group, the PayPal Mafia or not, like doesn't really matter. But I was going to mention that, like, we should get back to Tulsi. However,
right.
I did like this article in Mint Press News has another angle on this, which is that like Omidyar like loves the Dalai Lama, which like they say like, well, the Dalai Lama is like a huge
CIA
Hindu nationalist booster. Yeah, and also they
that makes sense.
Being CIA asset, but so
tutored by an SS officer as a child.
So
7 years into bed. Yeah. So I mean,
most of this article is about the Dalai Lama and like how he was like in a sex cult and had a slave plantation. So that's one of the headlines. I didn't actually read the passage beneath, but anyway, yeah. So going back to what you were reading that brought us off on this.
Well, yeah. It was just that I was reading from this article about her connections to BJP people
everyone
and
chanting Tulsi.
these donors. Yeah. It brings up the wedding in 2015.
Yeah,
this is her wedding to Abraham Williams, and let's see. I think all the Chris Butler people are basically there, and also
you were reading
BHP spokespeople.
You were reading this part where like they said like that The Intercept criticized her for getting for supporting Hindu nationalists, and she lashed out with an opinion piece for Religion News Service headlined "Religious Bigotry is Un-American." She said her critics were trying to foment anti-Hindu sentiment.
Right.
Which is like, okay, Tulsi. Like, it's interesting that she says that because when it comes to Muslims, I remember her saying like Kamala's, national strategy to counter Islamophobia demonstrates one of the main reasons why I left the Democratic Party. Wow, she still has a Democrat habit of calling it the Democratic Party, not the Democrat Party.
I know she needs really to get on board with calling it Democrat
she
Party. That's how you know you really made it.
She's not really signaling properly. But anyway, it has become rife with protectors and apologists for Islamism, i.e., radical Islam. One of the main ways they protect Islamism from legitimate criticism and condemnation is by labeling anyone who attacks Islamist jihadists as bigoted Islamophobes. Projection. Anyone who criticizes like this like rapacious like Hindu nationalist movement is a Hindu phobe in Tulsi's universe. But yeah, it's exactly what she's describing there. Speaking of her Twitter, I just saw that I also flagged this. I don't know if you remember this, but in 2021, this was her tweet on 9/11, the 10th anniversary of 9/11.
Oh, okay.
Let us hashtag never forget that it was the Islamist ideology which inspired the terrorist attacks and declaration of war against America on 9/11. And it is this Islamist ideology that continues to fuel terrorist attacks around the world and, ellipsis, is the foundation for the so-called Islamic countries like Pakistan, first example, Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia's discriminatory policies against Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, etc. Okay.
Now I can. It's so funny. I mean, but yet I can hear some of the Tulsi defenders crying out. But wait, Dimitri and Khalid, what about her based anti-interventionist positions that the military-industrial complex can't stand? And I mean, it's worth discussing, but also like I think we have to acknowledge how complicated this whole thing is, because I don't even know if I can fully make sense of like what her motivation is. It made more sense when she was like a Bernie coattail rider and she was talking about regime change wars and stuff, and it's like, oh, Tulsi's kind of like riffing on like the foreign policy side of the Bernie movement about the doing a little light anti-imperialism kind of like rhetoric and stuff like that. But now that she's like in the Trump orbit, like it doesn't even, I mean, I guess Trump has like a certain reputation for like, I'm not going to start any wars, or whatever. But like, it's not like the central defining thing. And certainly other people in the administration are not like anti-interventionist.
I think in a way that element might be sincere. Like when it doesn't like conflict with like her core principles, like of, hating Muslims,
programming.
Like, exactly, her core programming. And I think in a way it probably is part of her core programming, because remember, like when Chris Butler was talking to Prabhupada, like he was saying like, Vietnam, it was all the corporations, right? And like it doesn't seem like he really, even though he hated communism, it seemed almost like he kind of kept that element of his dad's politics where he was like suspicious of like the military industrial complex in a way. At least like of the Vietnam War and things like that. He didn't like become a rabid like Vietnam booster or anything. Like I don't think that's like
unlike Moon.
I don't think that's a driving thing, but I think that like, you know, that might be like, you know, something that actually like she, again, like with Syria, like it kind of makes sense in a way because like, you know, a lot of people who kind of sympathize with, again, like I said, like there's, and I'm not saying that like there's no legitimacy to this side or that there isn't like a principled anti-imperialist position to be taken on Syria, and that it wasn't like a nightmare that ultimately was really caused by the American invasion of Iraq in large part. But it kind of does dovetail with like hating Muslims in a way, because like that article said, you know, Assad, he's not really
you're right.
secular per
like,
se, but he definitely can be
it's the
cast as
ISIS
kind of the
factor.
secular authoritarian, and all these rebels are like these degenerate Sunnis who are just going to massacre like if they, you know, take control, they're going to like just start foaming at the mouth and like killing everybody, you know, because that's their Muslim nature, whereas Assad is like, you know, a principled secular man, you know, like, so it kind of fits in that way. In terms of like Russia and Ukraine, like, yeah, I feel like that, you know, that might just be, again, I mean, it's not so rare, like, especially in Trump world. Like Steve Bannon actually is kind of a good parallel in a way, because it's important to remember that Steve Bannon also, like, not as intense as Tulsi by any means, but like he also was like a seeker himself, you know, he was into TM, all that stuff. Like he was into like,
was he into TM?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah,
I know he's into Evola. Oh,
yeah, exactly. All that stuff. Like he, you know, he would meditate like during his own military service. Like he talked about it, you know.
Naval intelligence, yeah.
Yeah. So again, yeah, they're both intelligence officers. You know, they're very aligned in this way. So I feel like maybe like there's something in that kind of, I don't know. It does seem like Chris Butler was very like not about appropriating. You know, like he. Like obviously was influenced by the Hare Krishnas, but it seems like he was all about like his own books, what he says, didn't want people to go to school, like very much about controlling the information. So I'm not sure how plugged in he was to the larger like New Age milieu or New Age kind of conceptual universe. But it does, like I do see how like, you know, with Bannon as a kind of a parallel, it kind of makes sense in that way, you know. Like there's, you know, and Dugan, who's kind of like that too. You know, he's like a big figure in that world now. And like, again,
no, he is.
She's such a lie. Like she's so fake, like in terms of like how she represents herself. Like she has just like, in terms of what she publicly says and presents her beliefs to be, like you have no idea like what's going on under the surface with Tulsi. You know, she could.
I really have no idea. Yeah, like what does she actually believe, and what is an insight role, and like what is a tactical maneuver, and what is like cult programming? What, you know, it's like all hopelessly kind of jumbled together and hidden behind this mask that is like she's been successful, and you know it. I think we can say now, like, even though I think it was interesting to me that, you know, if as we suspect this is all some kind of like, you know, insight role kind of thing going on, that it would have been easier for her to like be more quiet about the Russia and Syria stuff at the time when she was like speaking out about it, because like there are Democrats that like we said earlier will never fucking forget like the betrayal. Like Adam Kinzinger like denounced her on the floor of the House when she went to Syria, and it's like, it's so disgusting, like you couldn't blah blah blah. And like even now, like that's going to be the attack they lead with. And you'd think if you're like a sus cult person that is being kind of like shepherded up through, you know, into the political halls of power, and you're trying to maneuver yourself without attracting too much attention to win over, you know, to get yourself embedded in the establishment, then maybe you wouldn't, you know, touch that third rail of like saying anything remotely sympathetic about Russia, because then everyone's just gonna, especially as a Democrat in those years, you know, and it's still kind of operative, right? So it makes me think that like, oh, this was important for some reason for her to take this stand, even when now it's kind of reaping dividends like years later. But for a long time, she was kind of like marginalized. The media wouldn't cover her when she ran for president, or like if they did, it was very negative, right? I mean, these two articles, she got profiles. They're all about Chris Butler and how she grew up in a sus cult. and how she's weird, right? Like, which I think are those are the ones that age best, because there are a bunch of other takedowns of, you know, like who she went to Syria with and how blah, 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 you know, and that kind of stuff. But I still feel like those are less, they're kind of less revealing, because I mean, yeah, she went and then like was kind of saying the same stuff as she was saying before she went. Like, she had her position on Syria pretty like crystallized, I feel like, by like 2015, you know. But maybe you could think, I remember at the time, like, you know, in that kind of like InfoWars era, when like Michael Flynn would go on InfoWars or whatever, or, you know, channels like that. And he would, it surprised me at the time, given that he was like a right-wing former DIA chief person, that he was a little bit more conciliatory towards Russia and is like, well, you know, they're blowing up ISIS. So like, you know, like the generals are going to have like back channel communications, you know, military to military, and basically prevent, you know, us from like attacking each other by accident. And like the, you know, the Russians, they're like realists. They kind of get it, and they don't like and, you know, Michael Flynn is also a guy who's a little bit like a lot psychotically obsessed with like Iran and Islamic extremism and stuff. So you could see it in that, like, well, we might have some beef with Russia, but we're much more sketched out by like Muslims and or China. But like the Islamic extremism thing is, you know, it's something we could like team up with Russia about, kind of thing. So maybe she was coming at it from that kind of perspective of like, well, you know, like compared to like ISIS or Al Qaeda, Assad is like the secular guy, Putin is like a secular guy, and, you know, maybe she inherited some of that like Esalen late Cold War vibes from Chris Butler, where they weren't like preaching about, even though they hated communism, like, you know, communism was only going to be defeated by like a spiritual revolution, man. Like, it wasn't, you know what I mean? Like they weren't, even though they were substantively anti-communist, that doesn't mean that they were like using like Wackel rhetoric and like front loading it like that, and might have even done a kind of like their own entryist like Cold War diplomacy thing of, you know, I mean, look at the Hare Krishnas, right? They arguably infiltrated the Soviet Union and then got arrested, and a bunch of them got like kicked out and, you know, put in prison and stuff. And I think it had to be a function of groups like the Hare Krishnas, like in the late Cold War. I also found a video from, I think it was like an Indian Hare Krishna like devotee guy, and I had to click on it because it was like, is ISKCON like a CIA operation or something like that? Like, it was just like a very blatant title, but it's this guy like debunking why it actually wasn't. Well, let me see, what was it called? Are ISKCON devotees CIA agents? Yeah, the short video. And this guy, like, I mean, because he's Indian, actually, it gave a little bit of context for, it was like, why would Indians think that people in the Hare Krishna movement specifically were CIA or whatever? And he says it's because, well, you know, this movement was founded in New York in the 1960s, and the earliest devotees of it were like white Americans for the most part. And then later, Prabhupada went back to India and started establishing a presence for it, which then like grew bigger and bigger after his death. And now I think might be like actually like the biggest section of Hare Krishnas is in India, and they actually have like a presence there. But at the time
they were probably
well, at the time, this guy says, when this was happening, like the 60s and 70s, you know, India was officially a big deal, a big member of the non-aligned movement, right, with Nehru and Tito and everything. But it was widely perceived overall that India was kind of a little bit more friendly with the Soviets, whereas Pakistan was considered to be more friendly with the US, you know, in this period. So therefore, when Indians started seeing these like white people show up being like, we're like, you know, like we're the followers of the true ascended guru, so like you need to like, you know, practice your Hinduism this way and stuff, and then these devotees that seemed to be pretty well funded and everything started like flooding out. Then a lot of them thought, oh, this is like a CIA op to like infiltrate Hinduism and like basically have this like sus guru who was like hanging out in New York for a while, like come back here and try to like influence Indian culture in some way to like turn it a little more in like a pro-American direction. And this guy's like, obviously, like that, none of that, that's totally not true. And like none of that ever happened, but that's why lots of people thought that. And I'm like, interesting. So, you know, that's something also to keep in mind from like the sort of U.S.-Indian relations vector, even going back to the 70s, was maybe maybe certain agencies were nervous that India was like politically drifting more like into a more comfy position with like the Eastern Bloc powers, and they wanted to maybe influence it a different way. And then, you know, along with all these other cults that were blossoming around the same time that were doing innovative, manipulative things with religion and politics, like the People's Temple, which is like, we're heckin' Marxist, but then we're like a weird, like fascist MK Ultra operation. Then they murdered everybody. So I don't know. It's interesting to think about that stuff. And I mean, there's also more on the bone with Chris Butler than just him being like a high control group sus, like anti-gay cult leader, right? Like,
hold on, I'm gonna.
There's criminal stuff.
Okay,
yeah. I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna get coffee.
And now, Jagat Guru speaks. You're just, you know, even if you haven't taken drugs yet, you're just waiting. It's just a matter of time before you do. Because you've got no inner protection. Human beings are terribly unpredictable and illogical.
The person cannot be a living contradiction. He must be in disciplic succession. Okay, do you understand this? Which many people try to do. They try to speculate, well, we think Jesus taught this and we think Jesus taught that. We're not going to bother with that. All we know is that there's a very great possibility that he did teach more in-depth the science of Bhakti Yoga, the science of Astanga Yoga for that matter, Kundalini Yoga even, Mystic Yoga. We don't know. We can speculate all we want. And the teachings of reincarnation. In scripture, it's very clear. Mantra meditation, like on beads, for example. People, they say, don't you get tired of saying it over and over and over? No. And that's proof that it's not ordinary sound vibration. If it's material sound vibration, surely you must think that we are not so completely different than everybody else. Do you understand this? Even now, the scientists even are coming to understand that in fact there is scientific evidence for the reality of astrology. That in fact, the stars and planets do affect our physical experiences, our physical makeup. This just keeps you further in the illusion that you are God when you're not. Okay? So it's not the drug cocaine that we're saying is bad and you shouldn't be into. We're saying that too. Do you understand this? Do you have a question? What's your name? Huh? Cassie. Do you have any questions?
How do I know that you are
a bona fide spiritual master? Yes. That is a good question. An intelligent person must ask this question. How do I know that someone is a bona fide spiritual master? You can know from God. That's all. First way that God tells you whether or not someone is his representative, the first way is from within the heart. From within the heart, he tells me, he confirms to me within that what this person is saying is true. This person is my representative. Not just that, but actually helps me experience from within my heart that I could place my entire life in this person's hands, and in doing so I am placing my life in God's hands. Okay? I'll have that vision from God.
Aloha, Jai Shri Krishna. I want to wish you and your family a very happy Janmashtami. Today is the day that millions of people around the world are celebrating the appearance of Lord Krishna. When we speak of Krishna, we're not speaking of a Hindu god, a Christian god, or a Muslim god. We're not speaking about someone who's a stranger or who we don't already have a relationship with. The name Krishna means he who is all attractive. So whether we know him as Krishna or by one of his countless other names, he is the origin of each and every one of us. He is the Supreme Father, our best friend. He is our source and our refuge. In the Brahma Samhita, our eternal kinship with Krishna is described. The jiva, or soul, is eternal and is for eternity without a beginning, joined to the Supreme Lord by tie of eternal kinship. The soul is transcendental spiritual potency. Not only are we related to Krishna, we belong to him. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, "And when you have thus learned the truth, you will know that all living beings are but part of me, and that they are in me and are mine." I belong to Krishna. My longing for happiness, my longing for freedom from fear, my longing for spiritual food, and my thirst for transcendental happiness can be quenched only by taking shelter in him, by loving him. I, the spirit soul, can be truly happy and content by giving Krishna my heart, by embracing him with my love. Each and every one of us can give Krishna our heart. And once we do that, then no matter what our situation in life, no matter how fearful, no matter how dangerous, we can always take refuge in that eternal relationship and find peace and happiness in that loving relationship with Krishna. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, text 66, "Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reaction. Do not fear." Every single one of us is a part and parcel of Krishna. He is our best friend, our shelter, and our strength. He is in our heart right now, calling out to us, "Come, I'm waiting for you. You are my eternal child and friend. Take refuge in me. I will take care of you. Just love me. Give your heart to me. Surrender to me. I welcome you into my embrace. I will give you all protection. Just love me." He is waiting for each of us to say, "Dear Krishna, my life is yours," so that we may truly and finally achieve peace and true happiness. There's no better way that we can honor and please Krishna on this holy day of Janmashtami. I'd like to take this opportunity to offer my deepest respects and gratitude to Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who 50 years ago made the arduous journey from India to the United States to share Krishna with the Western world. Without him, I and millions of others would never have known about the all-attractive, supremely lovable Lord Krishna. Jai Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Jai Shri Krishna.